one of the reasons we talk about the past so much, and we have to talk about the past when it comes down to the dynamics of sexuality, because none of you really understands your true nature, the dynamics of your true nature, where your true, what shall we say, connection with each other, connection with nature, connection with spirit, all came through sexuality, especially back in the garden experience. Now, that was primarily because you had no individual understanding of self in the way that you do now. If we, again, we say that if we took you back into a meditation of that time, and we used to do that with people when we had scads of time, then you would find it very unsatisfying because there was no sense of self, there was no sense of I. There was only that dynamic of that sense of we. And so the edges of things, the transitions of things, the understandings of things were much more, what shall we say, watery. They were much more interspersed energetically, emotionally, in that sort of that sea of belonging, SEA of belonging that existed in that time. And we like to say there was no separation between you and nature, no separation between nature and spirit. And so there was that feeling of that being of oneness. And within that dynamic of that oneness, there was a natural sexuality that really had to do with, what shall we say, ease and love and comfort, and came from a dynamics of a positive experience rather than one which is assumed, a survival one.
Ah, okay.
Well, isn't that what's assumed within the dynamics of what you have been taught within this paradigm? That is, that in order to not be sinful, and that is, you can say what you want about the dynamic of men, but that is, that's old, that is archaic, that really had to do when there was no birth control or anything like that. And the dynamics of feminism have truly changed the situation, because there is, and each of you are considered, believe it or not, feminists to different levels. Even those of you that don't consider yourselves feminists, in fact, you are feminists to a certain level, because with Gloria Steinem, and back in those days, there was a concerted effort to have an expansion of freedom around the feminine. And with the onset of the dynamics of birth control
That
and
was huge.
all of that stuff, and the problem now that is that that energy has gone in a whole extreme direction as well, and so you have that situation now, and it's not. It's prevalent within, we would say, the younger age groups, of which we would put Natalie among those. Um, um, the younger age groups, where that dynamic of that interaction of trying to sort out relationship is more prevalent, more relevant than some of you older farts. So, it's like, you either have a dynamic that is settled, or you are settled within your own dynamic to the point where your status quo is
Why
a,
did you mention Shell too?
well, we assume that she is including herself in that dynamic.
Oh, okay.
But the point that we were trying to make is that we're trying to get you to understand that the dynamics of sexuality that you all have, because you are all connected back to that mirabile energy, that initial energy. And we realize it's the first time
Used
we've
to.
used that word, because it's something that we made up. So it is a dynamic of, but we have called it the mirabile energy for so many years, because it is a dynamic of what would you call a tribe of primates that were, that had this perfect life until, just as every child moves and grows, so too does a species move and grow. Just as every child needs to leave the mother and the father to establish their own dynamics, so too did you as a species need to leave that dynamic of paradise to become more than you were then, which was basically a symbiotic kind of hive mind hive mind dynamic, now being reflected in the dynamics of your world by a new TV show. It's not so new, called Pluribus, right?
Hmm.
So that's something that you might want to explore in some of your spare time in order to what shall we say, get an understanding that reality is beginning to reflect those dynamics to each of you in its own way, but to each of you personally, as well as in the reflection of the consensus reality. And there is really, mm, you just need to pay attention to it to the point of, when does it become, and we mean the consensus reality, when does it become a threat to you personally, right? And it's slow, it's insidious, which allows you to adjust and to become, but the dynamic is resilience for you, dear ones. Is about being resilient within the dynamics of change that are more than apparent at this point.